Should women get paid as much as men? This is a topic that gets thrown around a lot in internet debates, sometimes with not much nuance, often revealing people's ideological position more than it's actually tracking the data of what's out there. So in this video, I'm going to unpack this question. Right off the top, I can tell you the short answer to this question is yes, but. Where most people come down on this, and this seems completely fair to me, is when people do the same work, they should get paid the same. Right? So if you're doing the same work, the same hours, you should be paid the same. That's not even a men-women issue. That's across all demographics of how you could think about people. Maybe with the slight exception of experience, right? Meaning that sometimes for a particular job, there's an experience band that might dictate whether you're kind of earning more or less in a particular role. But when essentially people are doing the same work, they should be paid the same. And by the way, we have pretty robust discrimination laws. That's not to say that they're always enacted, but generally we do have good discrimination laws that say that when you're doing the same job, regardless of your gender or other things, you should be paid the same. Where this gets a little bit more nuanced is when we start to look at it en masse, and there still is a small but significant pay gap between men and women. And why is that, right? And so there are many factors that go into that. One of the factors is that in terms of what we quantify as paid work, men may, particularly in certain roles, work longer hours than women, and that's partly why they're getting paid more. Now, there's a whole other thing that goes alongside this, which is women often take on more responsibilities in the home around house chores, domestic life, child rearing, and we are learning as a society how to value those things more. And in our current way of measuring value, which is normally via money and paychecks, we're not obviously paying people to do those roles. But this is one thing that factors into this. So when I'm talking about work in the context of this video, I mean work that is currently remunerated, and whether that's remunerated or not is a separate question I'm not getting into here. And I am sensitive to people's arguments that we should definitely value and maybe value more monetarily, caregiving roles and so on and so forth. But I'm talking about paid work. Where we have the biggest gap is what they call the unadjusted pay gap. And so adjusted pay gap versus unadjusted pay gap is basically the sort of other factors that go into what people get paid, right? So some of these are factors like hours, part-time versus full-time. Some of them are factors like education. Some of them can be factors like residence and immigration status. There's a number of them, but they basically, when you factor those things in, the pay gap between men and women is less, which actually, what does that mean? It means those other factors are explaining a significant part of the pay gap between men and women, right? Whether they're part-time or full-time. And the biggest pay gap, you may know this in a sense, is what they call the mother penalty, right? That actually earnings between men and women track fairly similarly until a woman starts to have children. And then, whereas for a guy, even whether he's having children or not, typically through time, his earnings are going up. Obviously there's huge variance in this in terms of individual life paths and even particular groups, but just generally speaking, that's what happens to the graph. But for women, there's kind of a drop-off sometimes and a stagnation. And maybe they never get back to the trajectory that they were on before they had children. Obviously, again, there are many exceptions to this, but this is what the data shows at large. So this would invite us societally to be in a conversation about what do we do about that, right? How do we potentially make it easier and less of a penalty for mothers to have children, right? How do we encourage those women that want to back into the workforce and that they're not getting discounted for that time that they took out to do something which we as a society value very much, or should, right? Having children. And at the same time, how do we valorize women for whom actually they feel comfortable, the fact that they would rather be spending time at home and would rather not be spending time in the workplace. I mean, what the actual data shows is that for men and women, most parents would like to have a balance, right? They would like to have a balance of spending high quality time with their children, particularly when they're younger, and also being able to continue to pursue their career. So I think part of this actually goes to sort of our open-mindedness to models and ways of paying people and ways of giving people benefits that perhaps allow a more blended mix of maternal and paternal leave, and people being able to get back into the workplace, but not necessarily having to do it full time, but maybe also not having to pay a career penalty so much for that. So the biggest gap that we see is between mothers and non-mothers, and actually more accurately said is between mothers and fathers, right? Fathers are not paying the career earnings graph trajectory of men who are fathers and men who are non-fathers. They are actually very similar. They are much more similar than dissimilar. Now, some people might say, well, yes, but if you live in a two-parent household and it's a father and a mother, then really the thing you have to look at is household income, right? So that father's income is continue to go up, even whilst maybe there's a kind of drop off or a stagnation in the mother's income. But that sort of works, right? That then the father can principally, in a family that wants to do it that way, in this more sort of traditional provider configuration, that actually works out. Now, in some instances, that may be true. In other instances, that may not. And they're obviously, it might not be by design, right? So it might be that mother actually is wanting to continue her career kind of on the trajectory that she did before. So I think there's lots of really interesting societal questions about how we value child rearing, how we give people flexibility to come in and out of being full-time in the workplace without penalizing it, how we encourage people, right, to kind of live their authentic expression when it comes to work versus parenting. I know a lot of parents who kind of feel like they're doing neither well, right? And particularly I think this is true of mothers, and I've heard it from people even I'm close to and people I've known that kind of feel like they are back in the workplace but are really tired and not doing a great job, and that they are, trying to be a I don't know what I'm eating here, eating flies. They try to be as present as they can at home, but they sort of feel like they're not there for as many of the hours that they would like to be. So here's kind of hats off to all the parents out there who are trying to figure it out, often in very trying hard working circumstances. So after we've done the adjustments, right, for things like education level, part-time, full-time, there is still a gap between men and women. So what's going on there? How much of that is actually a risk of some kind of discrimination? How much of it is it to do with the native preferences that men and women have in terms of their career? How much is it to do with the level of disagreeability and self-orientation that people have? I think those, I can't give you the exact formula for it, but I think those are the main explanatory factors. So let me just put a little bit of meat on that bone. So what the data seems to show is that in the most sort of progressive egalitarian societies, which are generally deemed to be the Scandinavian countries, where there are generous social policies and there are more likely to be things like paternity benefits that are generous, that actually counterintuitively there is more of an expression towards what you would sort of call gender typical stereotypes in the careers that people choose. So that actually when you give people more choice and you give them more government social support, there are actually more women that say want to be nurses and elementary school teachers, and let's say more men that want to work in engineering and tech. So it might be that what we're not really looking for is parity of the same numbers of women wanting to be engineers and work in tech. We obviously want to knock down any barriers to any girls and women that want to be in those industries, in the same way that we want to knock down any and all barriers to men who want to be nurses and elementary school teachers. And we might also have to just honor that in at least how it's societally happened up until now. It's not to say that future societies with different types of ideas about men and women and gender, this may obviously shift. This is where I sort of disagree with people who say, well, how can the proportion of population, for instance, that's gay, how can that go up? Well, it's like, well, actually people's levels of acceptance of lifestyles that aren't majority lifestyles, I think has an impact on how many people can freely express themselves into those lifestyles. So the more we make it easy for men to be nurses, the more that is fully socially acceptable and encouraged, and all those pathways of mentorship and networking and making those career paths available to people, from people that you can look at as role models and say, oh, I can see many instances of men being nurses helping young men into the profession. The more that happens, to me, the more likely it is that numbers would go up. But it may also not be true. It may also be that people's preferences get more expressed the more free they are. That there are just things that typically, in gross orienting generalization, men are more drawn to, and typically in gross orienting generalization, women are more drawn to. Obviously, there's so much nuance in this, right? So I have to talk in these kind of broad brush strokes, but hopefully you get the point. The other piece that's important here, why I was talking about disagreeability, right, is that in some professions, particularly in business development, sales, and the corporate world, but other and maybe even all professions to certain extents, some professions are much more kind of fixed and regulated in how their income bands work. But people's earnings relates to how willing they are to ask for more earnings, how willing they are to leave a role that doesn't provide them with earnings, how willing they are to go advertise themselves and pursue, interview opportunities and networking with other, alternative employers. That does have an impact on how people are paid. And so, agreeability is one of the big 5 personality factors, right? Ocean, O-C-E-A-N. A is agreeability, and generally. And obviously these are bell curves with huge overlap between them, but generally, on the whole, women are a little bit more agreeable than men. And that probably has some translation into how likely they are to really own their worth, fight for their sort of their value monetarily at least, and get compensated for it, right? So that's probably part of the explanation of some of the differences. And then when you combine that with these preferences that people may have for different types of careers, and again, we can totally be in the conversation of, should we be paying an elementary school teacher just as much as a highly skilled tech worker? Yeah, maybe we should. So totally happy to be in that conversation. But just as things currently are constituted, if we've got more men going into engineering and tech and more women going into primary school teaching and caregiving, and obviously again, I'm just picking 2 very small categories. Obviously there are men and women working all across even categories and jobs that I probably don't even know and you don't even know, but just to pick some kind of common ones where there are difference, then currently, tech jobs are probably paying a lot more than elementary school teaching, right? So that's going to be part of the the pay gap. It might not be the place of the state to intervene in that, right? Depending on how you want the state to be involved in your life or not, how kind of small state or big state you are. I'm happy for there to be sort of maximum door opening and opportunities, networking, career mentoring, incentivizing. And then there's also a point at which people's own preferences should probably be expressed. And I'm not sure if those will always be exactly the same between en masse men and en masse women. I think even if you just look at something like the 5-factor personality theory, the differences that exist, even though there's as much similarity as difference, right? So these things are, there's overlap, but there is difference. That difference will probably express itself in career choices, and it might not be for the state to intervene in the free market to determine exactly how everything is paid, right? But that's really a political question that we could get into. So, yes, men and women should earn the same for the same work. Men and women sometimes aren't doing the same types of work. I think we need to put more value on part-time work and flexible and portfolio careers where people can do more than one thing, getting people who want to work back into the workplace without penalty. I'm not sure exactly what social policy delivers that, but I think it would be a good thing. There is also the risk that people who, and I've heard women say this, it's like they don't want to go part-time because they kind of know that part-time, if they're still doing the same kind of job they were doing before, that now they're getting paid part-time to do most every of what they were doing full-time. That's not a good thing, so we need to talk about that. And then we maybe need to make employers more aware that, sometimes it might be the men in your workforce are asking for more, but that doesn't mean that they're better, right? And so maybe we should have, training and awareness around that. Maybe we should have mechanisms where it's not just the individual that is asking for what they earn. Maybe we should make it easier for groups to say, you know what, this employee is doing a great job. We all collectively think that they should be making more money. There are some experimental companies where either all the jobs are paid the same, or they let basically the staff decide what people get paid, or perhaps within some sort of parameters. So there's ways that we could sort of socialize that maybe get around some of the individual temperamental difference. Maybe we could also live in work cultures where it's not quite so sort of individuated salesy orientation, that actually we try to pay people well for good work, and that is the general principle that we're operating under. And we also do want to continue to close that adjusted pay gap, right? That maybe there should be a pay gap for education, but maybe there are other forms of education that we could be valuing more. And maybe we also want to be going after, why are people in different immigration statuses getting paid or underpaid? We could go after that. So there's lots of ways that the adjusted pay gap also contains problems that I think we should be looking at. But at the end of the day, let's pay people the same for the same work if that's what they're doing. And let's have more nuanced and sophisticated conversations about where people aren't being paid the same, as to whether that's a problem or whether that's something that we collectively want to intervene on. So that's what I think and know. What do you think and know? Please hit me up. Let me know your experience. I read all the comments. Thanks so much for being here. As always, I'm Jack.